I want to thank everyone for joining us today. We have a great group of experts with us here to talk about a new project that I will let them introduce. But I'm Rachel Grabenhofer. I'll be the host. I'm the managing scientific editor of Cosmetics and Toiletries. And maybe you can start with a brief introduction to each of yourselves.
My name is Bill Walsh, and I'm the director of the Safer Chemistry Impact Fund. And we are an organization that is supporting the transition to safer chemistry in multiple industries. And we were a co-sponsor of this report. And I think you'll probably spend most of your time talking with Heather and Stacy, but I'm just here to kind of emphasize that the beauty and personal care industry is kind of on the forefront of something that's really a trend across industries. So if I can help with any context on that, I'm happy to do so.
Great.
I'm Stacy Glass, and I'm the co-founder and executive director of Chemforward. We started Chemforward 6 years ago as we were working with companies on the beautiful design philosophy of kind of safe materials that can be perpetually cycled, manufactured in ways that respect humans and the environment. But the most difficult thing for these companies was the chemistry. And we realized that it wasn't really the science of the chemistry, it was the knowledge of what are the human and environmental impacts. And so Chemforward mission is to create broad access to chemical hazard data and specifically illuminate safer alternatives.
And last, I'm Heather McKenney. I'm the Science and Safer Chemistry lead here at Chemforward, and I really support all of our scientific endeavors to both identify where we need to invest in some chemical hazard data, but also to ensure that our data meets the highest quality for data and transparency. And my background is in consumer packaged goods. I actually led toxicology and product safety at a beauty and personal care company for 6 years before joining Chemforward. So really excited to see how this work can be used cross-sectionally across beauty and personal care, electronics. This information really helps support additional sectors.
Right. So let's talk about the report itself. I know we're a little bit ahead of it. I'd like a little bit of clarification too, if you could help me out. So I know that you have this Know Better, Do Better collaborative that's happening. Is this a report that's coming out of that then?
Yes, it is. Our Know Better, Do Better collaborative is a group of retailers, brands, and I think notably suppliers who were doing individual work with Chemforward on understanding what's known and not known about the chemicals used in their product lines or on their shelves, and for the chemical suppliers looking for a B2B affirmation of safer in their ingredients that they were selling to the marketplace. And what we did over the course of about a year is we were running individual, what we call ingredient intelligence reports for each of these companies, and we aggregated them together. This was about 2 years ago. Say, can we say something about the industry? And I think we were all saw the same thing. And so what we're doing is now bringing together that and making it public, the 2023 data from this group. And I think what they saw was that, okay, we are using a lot of safer chemistry, and you'll see that in the report. There are some high hazards that need to be addressed, but 30% of the ingredients being used are unknown. What are the human and environmental impacts? And I think that was the rallying point for everybody who joined the collaborative. So our charter is data gaps are unacceptable, and it's larger than any one company. We're going to work together to fill those data gaps and populate a shared repository. So no one has to redo any work, very efficient approach. And third, everyone's going to encourage their suppliers to get their trade name ingredients assessed. So a very simple charter, but a really compelling rallying point for competitors. So nice pre-competitive space.
I should mention too, if I've got this right, it's the Beauty and Personal Care Ingredient Intelligence Report that is coming out October 22nd. Did I get that title right?
Yes.
Okay. And it looks like you have over 8,000 products that you've reviewed to come to this determination that 70% are well characterized, but the 30% are not. Yeah. Okay, great. So I want to get into some specific questions about this report. I'm wondering, maybe you mentioned a little bit of this, but I'll ask it and see if you have any additional comments to add about what the main drivers are.
I think the market need was this idea of getting ahead of regulation, or just this, what is the next chemical that's going to come onto everybody's radar, whether it be a consumer concern or a regulatory concern. And when we engage in proactive chemical assessment, then we understand what's sort of in the low concern and what's in the high concern zone, whether it's on anybody else's radar or not. So the kind of data that we're generating at Chemforward helps companies understand what falls into that low concern bucket, what's in the high concern bucket, and what they might want to start getting out of now before it is on anybody else's radar.
Okay. So then is it more for the companies that are developing the products to go on the shelves, or is this something that would be consumer facing as well?
It really is a B2B. There's so many nuances, and maybe Heather can speak to this. While we offer really simple A, B, C, D, F question mark, that represents 90 or 100 pages of toxicology that's been done across 21 human and environmental endpoints. And a roll-up score tends to obscure some important information in there, but that Heather regularly deals with.
Yeah, so to interpret that really in-depth toxicological information, we found that the toxicology formulators, more of those technical experts at an organization, are interested in coming into the repository where we house the endpoint data and ask some of those questions about comparative hazard assessment. What might be of high hazard via one exposure route, but not another, and start to make some of those trade-off decisions based on the underlying data. And consumers don't really have that ability to ask themselves that questions necessarily. Sure, there are some really educated consumers out there, but we really find that the underlying data is really helpful in asking some of those informed substitution questions, which really the organizations are doing themselves.
I'm wondering if there is maybe a broad description you could give in terms of what's considered well characterized versus what is not well characterized. Like, what is missing? Do we have nothing on those other ingredients, or is there something in particular that you're looking for that we don't have?
So most of these chemicals that we see used in beauty and personal care products have some level of information available. They might be on a list somewhere, but then the quality and the credibility of that list, of course, is something that we need to understand. There might be an ECHA dossier, the toxicological dossiers that are available, publicly available. But what hasn't happened with that data is it hasn't been packaged into useful hazard information, which can then inform individual endpoints of concern. So just because there's data out there that says, in an RIPT panel, there was sensitization, that doesn't tell us if this is a high hazard skin sensitizer. Really, we need the experts to go through that data and provide a classification under existing chemical hazard assessment methodologies. So using that information to then inform the hazard endpoints, we can then characterize the totality of the hazards, right? Just because we know something about one of those hazard endpoints doesn't mean we know enough to say that something is safe or therefore safer. And one of the adages that we always think about is that toxic is easy and safe is hard. And so to say that something is toxic, it could just be a category 1 carcinogen. That's enough to say maybe this is an F-rated chemical. But to say that something is an A or a B, we really need to go through and do that characterization work with qualified toxicology experts so that we can say with sufficient certainty that there is enough data to call that chemical safer, and that we're not subject to a high level of data gaps, which also would raise concerns, right? We don't want to be classifying something as safer that doesn't have enough data across the human and environmental health endpoints.
So you brought something up that I'm curious about too, for those who haven't read the report. I'm wondering if there's sort of also a brief that you could give us in terms of what those grade levels are. They seem to be by letter and even by color. Maybe that's just visual in the report, but how do you divide those out then?
Yeah, so A's, B's, and C's are typically considered safer chemistry. So to meet the A level is a very, very high bar. So there needs to be data available for all endpoints, and all endpoints which oftentimes are challenging to classify with high certainty. So something like endocrine disruption, it's really hard to call that low hazard. It's really easy to identify when something might be endocrine active or an endocrine disruptor, but it's really hard to prove a negative in that sense. So A's are a very, very high bar to clear. And then B's and C's are where you'll actually find chemicals that might have a moderate level of concern with something like irritation. These group 2 hazard endpoints, which aren't of higher concern for chronic low dose exposures. So things like I mentioned, irritation, sensitization, etc. And then the C's are where we also might even find chemicals that have some data gaps, right? We don't want to call something a B or an A that has a data gap in, there are too many data gaps across the entirety of the chemical hazard profile. So really, in general, those are safer chemistries. Those are not going to be things that are CMRs, PBTs, they're not going to be captured in there. And then D's and F's are reserved for those higher hazard or emerging hazard categories. So F's are where you'll find your PBTs, category 1 carcinogens, etc. And D's, which we rolled out earlier this year, is a category where we're trying to capture chemicals of emerging concern. So there are chemical classes within the D hazard band that we're hoping to flag to users, because this is a B2B tool. Hey, this might need a little bit more review before you move forward. This is where you'll find your PFAS compounds that are data poor, that don't have enough information to classify hazards across the important endpoints for PFAS. So we'd say, hey, that actually might be subject to a regulation. So we typically say avoid D's and F's and prefer A, B's, and C's.
Are there 2 or 3 examples that you could give on the emerging list that right now anyways, supplier companies should be on the lookout for or expect a little pushback perhaps?
Yes, so we would say PFAS chemicals in general, obviously. And we also have chlorinated organic and chlorinated organic and brominated organic substances on the D hazard band. But what is really important for us is that there is criteria to test out of that D hazard band, because we are a data-driven organization. If there were data available for a chlorinated organic substance, for example, to fill some of those data gaps and show that some of those key hazard traits are actually of low hazard, one of those chemicals could then be elevated into an A, B, or C hazard band as long as the data did exist.
We're coming into this from a perspective where I at least used to say, there's 80,000 chemicals in use and we only know this much. You know what we're finding doing these big data analytics is that actually there's a couple thousand, key ingredients that are being used over and over again in beauty and personal care. And we're finding this in other sectors as well. Different ingredients, but still just a couple thousand. That's a really manageable number. There's a light bulb for people like, oh my gosh, we could get our arms around this. And then when we run it through the ABCs and you can see that we're 70% characterized, you're like, oh my gosh, 66% of this is low concern. I don't have to, worry about that so much. And here are the things I should get after. So it really provides, for the first time, I think, some empowerment for sustainability professionals who have been doing this for a long time and maybe have really only had impending regulation or consumer concerns to react to. Now they can get proactive. So I think that's the real power behind this. Beauty and personal care was low-hanging fruit because there's such high, unprecedented transparency, which is so great. And yes, we're going for more. Mm-hmm. In other sectors, we are doing the same kind of characterization, but it's not quite as easy because of the transparency issue.
We've heard a lot about hazard and risk, and from a scientific standpoint, the industry sees that there's a difference, especially in regulations even. So I wondered how you respond to, from the industry standpoint, that criticism that it's more about the exposure route and the concentration, perhaps.
We are a hazard first organization, not a hazard only organization. So there's a lot to be known about the underlying hazards of a chemical before you make a decision to either use that or substitute a chemical during informed substitution, alternatives assessment, etc. So what you don't want to do is if you have something that might be a category 1 carcinogen, you're looking to do better, you don't want to select another category 1 carcinogen. So really it's to help with those types of decision making. I would also say that the benefits of using a hazard first approach, not only to meet the regulatory requirements where those exist, is that it is a more cradle to grave approach. This does help us to start chip away at some of those process chemistries that might be of hazard to occupational exposures, that might result in environmental releases and end of life as well. So it is one way to have a more cohesive approach to reducing the potential exposure to chemicals of potential concern.
Maybe just one last question from a bit of a higher level. I'm wondering, sort of, what do you hope this report and collaboration can do for the industry?
This might be a great opportunity to let Bill speak to, like, why are we doing this characterization, Bill, if I might call on you, because I think it goes beyond just beauty and personal care.
Yeah, it does go beyond beauty and personal care. And often companies do start, with their customers and ensuring customer safety and customer satisfaction. But the unique attribute of looking at hazard first is that it's the first part of the equation in evaluating risk. It's actually the most scientifically rigorous part of that equation because we do have concrete data. It is knowable. We know what we know. We know what we don't know. And when you remove a hazard, the benefits flow both ways. They flow toward the consumer who gets a safer product, but also everything comes from somewhere. And the chemicals are manufactured somewhere, the products are manufactured somewhere. And reducing hazards has the effect of making the product and the production safer for everyone, for the workers who are dealing with that, for the communities who are host to those factories, the waterways, the air emissions, everything. So hazard provides a real way for all of us to live our values. And when we look at it from the perspective of the chemistry and the function, we're able to share this data not only across the beauty industry, which was a major advance of the Know Better, Do Better collaborative, but across other industries as well. Fragrances and many of the ingredients in cosmetics are used in other products. So that's part of our big picture goal here, is that a better understanding of our chemistry, centering hazard first, has implications that extend across society and across industries.
I think when you ask about, like, what we hope will change, and it's not just this report, but with this work at the partnership with the Safer Chemistry Impact Fund and doing these baseline metric zero is what we're calling it for the various industry sectors, is we really want to change the direction of this information, right? We're just constantly receiving bad news about the chemicals that we're using. This is a way to change that direction, change the flywheel into being proactive about what's known and showing companies and entire industries that the problem is manageable and we can get after it together. So I think that one of the outcomes, I hope, of this work that we'll see in 5, or maybe it will take 10 years, is the flow of information really changing from brands and retailers being responsible for creating these chemical hazard assessments so they can manage their brand risk, to suppliers come onto the market with this information and the hazards are transparent from day one, from the design phase. That will really change the chemistry of our products.
Mm-hmm. I think with that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up. I want to thank you all for your time today. Thank you for your insights, Bill, Heather, and Stacy, and for joining me and for, giving us a peek into this up and coming report.
Thanks for the opportunity, Rachel.